All right, and here we go. We're starting our new show, Spooky Action at a Distance, best show north, south, east, and west of the Rockies. I'm your host, Kyle Finley, and we're going to have a full panel here today with discussing religious and philosophical questions. It's going to be just kind of like a normal discussion. I don't know, if you're watching this on TV right now, we're going to be putting this onto YouTube, and it's going to be on Facebook as well, so check it out at Spooky Action at a Distance, Facebook.com, whatever. It's going to be on YouTube, and it's going to be on our Torn page. Check that out. That's where we post a lot of discussions on different religious topics and different things like that. So I think that's about everything I have to say there. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is discuss what exactly our positions are, and I kind of arranged us to be kind of like humanists on this side and the non-humanists on that side. That's how I like to describe it.
Non-human.
We're the animals.
Non-human.
So
Okay,
I'm the host, Kyle
I'll go
Finley,
with that.
just so everybody knows, and for this debate, my position is really hard to pin down, but I'm going to describe myself as a humanist for this debate, as in I think we should focus on, I think we should focus on helping out humans and kind of all the paranormal, all the things that we can't prove, we should just kind of like push that off. I always bring up the Confucian quote, well, not really a quote, but the Confucian idea that we should focus on this life first, and then we should focus on the afterlife. So there's a lot of things we can, because I actually do paranormal study. Anybody who watches my TV show, like half of it's paranormal, ghost stuff, UFO stuff, all this, very weird stuff. But the one thing I don't do is like have that influence my daily decisions in life. I always think that we should try to help out each other without, looking to paranormal spirits, kind of stuff like that. But it's always been a huge interest to me, so that's kind of why I have these debates. Is I kind of want to know more, and I'm always studying this stuff, and I think it'd be great to learn more about it. So I'm gonna pass it over to Will.
All right. Kyle, I would agree with pretty much everything that you said. Hi, by the way. I'm William Donlan. I am the president of the Secular Student Alliance here at UNO. And my position, like I said, I agree with Kyle on pretty much everything he just said, but I'm sure there's nuance.
You win the debate.
Yeah, I win, sorry. I also describe myself as an atheist, meaning that I don't actively believe in any gods. I'm not convinced that any gods exist. And also an anti-theist, meaning that I believe all religions are man-made and all gods are in fact man-made. On to Steve.
All right. Steve Snodgrass. I guess I'm still the acting president of the Omaha UFO Study Group, so that's how I know Kyle, but not president of anything else. I guess it's easy to be the first one to say, I have a nuanced position that allows you to play the slippery eel. And I don't want to, that's kind of what my first attitude was. I was going to come in here because I think what position I have is very complex, and it's constantly evolving. In the green room, which was like right here, like 5 minutes ago, I was showing William kind of the trajectory of 8 different sort of positions, from atheist to agnostic to panentheist positions that I've had, and now I've gone to making up my own words. And so I'd like to think I can defend at least a deist position and make that a coherent and believable proposition.
And for the audience, could you just kind of say what a deist position kind of is?
Well, and before, it's like my version of deism.
Sure.
I know the textbook, or I don't know if we're trusting Wikipedia, definition of deism is kind of the one who is the prime mover who started the clock turning at, let's say, the Big Bang, and has been hands off ever since. That's not the deism I have. I have a little bit of intercessionary, God's still in the process kind of deism, but it's hard for me to describe as theism at this point.
All right.
I don't know if you agree with that. It's fair enough.
Okay. My name is Jim Shaul, and I am here, I suppose, primarily because started a group here on campus called Torn, and which people can come and discuss religion and anything related to religion, and we have spirited discussions on the matter. And anybody can come and talk, and I think that's why he invited me.
You think?
I think, I don't know for sure.
I need
but-
somebody for the fourth chair.
Yeah, I
that
need
was
somebody for
sure,
the fourth
you know.
chair. And I honestly, I don't know exactly what position that I would, what you're asking for me. I'm here, I think, from your guys' perspective, I'm here as a theist, as a proponent of theism, which, if I could use your definition that you have, the difference is that deism, you have a creator, but not a sustainer and intervener. And theism, you have a creator and sustainer and intervener in human existence.
By that, I just, now we are over here.
Oh, now it
So
is.
now we are theists over here and kind of atheists over
Okay.
there. All right.
And I'm here to, not particularly, I think, you didn't ask me to defend any particular view or anything like that.
No.
But I'm here to answer questions based on what you have here.
And
So,
I posed it as a debate, but it's
Right.
like, it's kind of like open discussion. More
Sure,
like, but
sure.
everybody wants to see debates.
yeah, yes.
And we got different,
Yeah.
That's
everybody here has a different, kind of viewpoint. So it's like anything we talk about, there's going to be debate about, well,
Yeah.
why do you think that? Why do you think that, so.
I guarantee you, we're gonna have some disagreements between some of us.
Okay, so yeah, and throughout this, throughout the debate that we're having tonight, if anybody has any discussions, anybody here, we have a studio audience, I guess. It wasn't even planning on, but I'm like, oh, okay, that'll work.
You can start clapping so everybody knows that we have a studio audience.
Yeah, and
Or don't, and
Or
just
don't,
they'll
that's
never
fine.
know. I guess we don't have a studio.
we may all be
audience, I suppose.
hallucinating here.
Yeah,
There's
sure.
people.
If somebody gets off a real good zinger, though, we'd like to hear the ooh.
Yes.
Got him.
And the other thing is, anybody on Facebook, it looks like we got, probably just me, I think it's just one view on there at the moment. I don't know if you got your, but anyways, you can post questions on there too, so just throwing that out there.
Can you put lights on there and have them like go up in the air?
Oh, yeah,
Like,
that's
Ooh.
I could do that, but this is the first show. I finally got all this stuff together. We kind of jerry rigged this, the background, up, but
We'll be good.
so that's what we're gonna have to go with. So should we start with the questions first, or does anybody want to ask a question right away? Opinion?
Questions are fine with me.
Starting with the questions.
Yeah, that's good.
Oh, okay. So the first one, I'll go straight to Jim on this one.
Okay?
To answer your question, like why you were invited here, you always have like, whenever we ask questions in Torn, you always have like the best answers to this kind of stuff. Like, they're believable. They make sense. That kind of stuff. You don't hear a lot of that from a lot of people that I talk to on campus, anyways, that are kind of pushing like the Bible and different religions, and it's hard to really pin down where exactly they're at. But anyway, so I'll go with the first question. How can the Bible and science both be correct in cases where they contradict? And is there something that we can learn from that, is what I wanted to start off with.
When you say learn from it, are you learning from the contradiction or learning from...
Yeah, maybe
the
there's
two
some reason it contradicts, and that's why it's in there. I don't know.
Do you view science as contradicting your religious beliefs?
Just pile on the question. Steve, you want
Sure,
to ask him a question
yeah.
at the same time?
Well, first of all, excuse me, be doing that a lot. First off, science and the Bible, and I'm not here, first of all, the Bible proposes several things, okay? So it has several dogmas, okay? Science proposes a lot of dogmas, okay? I never say that, like, let's say, science contradicts the Bible, okay? Because then you're talking about a group of sentences contradicting a group of sentences, okay? Because you could say, science could say there was a guy named Abraham. A lot of secular historians believe there was a guy named Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so does science contradict the Bible there? No, not at all.
And one thing, just don't hit the table.
Don't hit the table.
That's why usually I have like a mouse pad. This is kind of a ghetto
Yeah.
setup here.
I know
but-
we said before there were no rules, but there's
Not
just
making rules.
Okay.
Yeah, it just kind of makes a muffled noise because it goes straight to these mics and there's like a really
Okay.
loud bass. But I mean, it's not horrible, but
I will try to follow your rules.
okay. Yeah.
So anyway, to me, it's kind of a misstatement to say that the Bible contradicts science because, again, there are things in there that are non-contradicted by science. There's a lot of things that occurred in the historical record that have been verified by science. So you can't just say that they contradict one another. That's not.
I
How that
to
works.
kind of press you, put your kind of the coals to your feet a little bit on this. I would argue there's lots of stuff like the Bible's account for how old the Earth is. You know, it gives
that was one I
a
was gonna bring
yeah,
up.
an account
okay.
of like 6,000 to 10,000 years.
Sure.
The common scientific understanding, the Earth is 14.5 billion years
Okay.
old.
And what you're saying does not contradict what I just said. I
Okay.
said there are several statements within the Bible that are not contradicted by science.
Okay.
We
I
can use the
didn't-
ooh on that one.
Okay. Are there some that
Okay,
do?
sure.
Yes,
Okay.
there's definitely some that do. So the question is, can they both be correct where they contradict? Logically, no. Two contradictory claims. Contradictory means if one is true, the other one's false. And if they both might be false, but if one is true, the other one has to be false. So by definition, they both can't be correct. Okay. So what do we do when there are contradictions? Well, to me, the way I approach the theory of knowledge is that we only know what we experience, and we don't experience what happened 6,000 years ago or 10,000 or 10 million years ago. No one's experienced that. We take information from others who tell us that that's what happened. And all we're really discussing there is the difference in how trustworthy are your sources compared to how trustworthy are the sources of the Bible. So that's really what this comes
I
down
think
to.
we might have a point of contention here, a point of disagreement, because I think that the entire appeal of the scientific framework of telling this story of how we all got here and why it all is the way that it is not because we're going to some authority saying, tell me what happened and I'm believing one authority over another authority, but the appealing part of science is that it's a method. There's a methodology to it, and if the scientists were in fact incorrect, there are ways to falsify those statements. So, if you found the classic example is a rabbit in the Jurassic period of fossilization, that would immediately we would no longer have a working model for how to explain the world that we inhabit, and it would immediately break down the scientific understanding. Is there anything analogous to the rabbit in your kind of understanding of this whole picture that comes together?
To make it as clear as possible, I think the science, by definition, operates with a method, and that method operates on observation, and that it operates on the production of scientific experiments that repeat things, and so it is an existential current process. Science is great when it's looking at things that are going on now and understanding things that are occurring in our material world at this moment. They're really good at that. They're extremely good at that. But when they start doing things like projecting into the future, and when they start doing things like saying what happened in the past, they're not really using that same scientific method. They're using extrapolation from current data, and they're basing it on a notion, an unproven notion, that things have always occurred at the same rate at the same time in history, and they have no proof for such a thing.
Would you have a similar kind of vein of skepticism about predictions like when eclipses will occur, for instance? Because science can make predictions.
Sure they do.
About
Make them all
things
the
that
time.
will happen in the future. We go and dig. We go to a certain location, and we dig, certain layers deep. We should be able to find a species that is a transition between one species and another. Or we can make predictions about when the moon will pass in front of the sun. So I don't know. I think it would be a little bit unfair to say that science can't talk about the future or the past.
It can talk about it, but it can't talk about it with certainty. It can make a prediction, and that prediction may in fact come true, but that's not the same thing like you did earlier. I'm going to die someday. Okay, that's not just a prediction. That you're saying that is an undebatable fact. Okay, and science can't make undebatable fact claims about the future. They can say what we know now predicts this will occur, And because if they're operating using good scientific method, then they should be able to do that, sure. But that doesn't mean they're right.
Well, in one part to insert, a biologist, I don't know, call him a Darwinist, I forget the guy's name at the moment, but the one who coined the term non-overlapping magisteria, that science is about things, and that is a different domain than religion. In the same way, the philosopher David Hume made an is-ought distinction. So science can tell us what there is in the world, if we want to define the world as consisting of objects, and religion concerns itself with ought. Science ought not get into the habit of telling us what we should do about our knowledge of how to split the atom. Is it true that the atom can be split for really good reasons that'll give us nuclear energy? Absolutely. But science had nothing to do really with telling us that we couldn't blow ourselves up and explode an atomic bomb too. So I guess when the question is specifically about the Bible, and if you enter into adding up all of the begets and the begats, is that in, I don't know what book that's in.
Genesis.
But, that's in Genesis already. They go right to that. Okay. Some people have looked at, let's do the opposite. Let's make the Bible a scientific document as an historical record that can be calculated based on days of creation, and that Noah was 900 years old. I don't know when he was born. Noah lived 900 years. And you add up all those things and you get roughly the new earth, the recent earth. So add all those numbers up and you have a 6,000-year-old that the universe was created about 6,000 years ago by God with the spoken word. And if you play that game of trying to have science take over the ought and religion take over the is, it's kind of a dead end as far as I'm concerned. I can certainly see how a lot of people would want to be able to use the Bible to justify and affirm beliefs about prophecy and history. It's not gotten me very far. There's kind of a dead end part of I'm not saying this is a bad question, Kyle. It was a perfectly fine question, but I guess
for me, I said one question.
If I
those
might
are my thoughts on
If I
it.
might interject, I agree with you in some sense. I agree with you that science can't tell you how to be moral, is I think what you're kind of getting at. Maybe not in so many words, but science
Maybe
can't
not
tell
yet.
you. Yeah, science. I can't tell you, how to act. There's no experiment that I'll be able to perform that says you should give to charity, right? Like, I can understand that point of view,
Well,
but I would also say that
there's like health benefits and stuff like that, right? Like, there see people who are like more generous.
I guess what I would say is science can't tell you what to value. I could never tell you. I could never tell you to value giving to charity or value living longer or these things using science as that base work. And I can agree with you on that. I also don't think that like Deuteronomy is a particularly good base for that either. I mean, I guess I can understand in principle the idea of non-overlapping magisteria, but in practice, that's just doesn't seem to be what's going on at all.
I agree with that.
You've got the young Earth creationists who like you were saying are playing the game of adding up all the begats in Genesis and coming up in the face of the scientific inquiry over the past 150 years. And how much of this you want to make allegory, I guess, is like a different question. I mean, is there any baby left in the bathwater, I guess, is where I'm coming from.
Well, I wanted to jump in if you don't mind.
Sure.
I know you're taking your intake breath to speak. But since he interjected you, I think I can interject
Sure.
him.
Absolutely.
I will
Thank you.
allow this.
Thank you. I don't like being rude. In my job, I have to be very, very not rude. You had said something, well, you said science can't tell us what to value, but I believe that's exactly what science has gotten to the point to where they believe they can tell us what to value. We have to value their perspective on reality. We have to value their understanding of what is true.
Who's they?
Science. Scientists.
Science.
We have to value science. That's what they're telling us. We have to value science above any other thing. And the biggest problem, I think, with science is that scientists, by definition, and I'm not saying they're wrong in this, but by definition, they have to operate in their day-to-day work as non-theists, of course, and they don't bring in, oh, well, I think an angel came and did this. You know, they exclude any non-physical, non-material explanation. They do that by definition.
I would disagree with you on that point. Scientists aren't saying we can't allow for the supernatural to be possible. If there is some way to demonstrate supernatural causation, that would become a new field of science. Like, it's in a way that, like, Kyle, I know you do.
It is a new field of science. I'm a paranormal
Yeah, paranormal,
scientist.
yeah.
So there
Then it
are
wouldn't,
people
then it wouldn't be
who
supernatural
are
anymore.
wanting to take the scientific method to look at these things, but I would say because they don't exist, those experiments cannot manifest in reality.
But I would say that what Kyle has been doing, I mean, let me ask you this. Do you believe that in general the scientific community has been fully supportive of your work?
No.
No. So
Definitely
they're
no.
operating as if all those inquiries are what? Pseudoscience.
Yeah.
Because they don't fit science. So therefore they value science and not non-science.
Sure, I mean, I think it's perfectly reasonable to value
Well,
science.
The
It's
other
a
point
very
I want to make along the lines with Jim is like, if you accept that the paranormal pseudoscience is true, then any scientific experiment goes out the window, right? Because, like, how do we know that that wasn't a ghost that did that? How do we know that it wasn't a demon that came in and either made it give you the correct prediction or give you a different prediction? Like, the second you open that door, it's like science goes out the window.
well. I mean, there are ways there are ways to examine supernatural claims using these techniques. I mean, if you look into like the research into the what are those like out of body experience called astral projections?
Yeah.
I mean, we've looked into these things. We've gotten a person who claims that they can exit their body and view a location that is separate from where their physical body is. And we have another person in another room looking at a painting or something, a number. And we ask the person who says that they can go out of their body, you know, what's in the other room. And it turns out they're not super great at guessing it. And there are other, examples of testing the supernatural. It's not impossible to do. It's just impossible to get a positive result, or so it seems.
Or so it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, like you were telling me about that school out back east, they have an entire department who is doing this research, and that they are coming up with some things that do seem to indicate that there is knowledge apart from what's in people's heads. And but my personal belief is that science at large will continue to reject it no matter what they find, because they operate as if there's only a physical realm. Everything is electromagnetic forces and entities.
No, I mean, I think, well, that's all that's been demonstrated to be. And I think that
I don't know about
scientists...
all that's been demonstrated, A lot of stuff I look at, it's like, I think it proves that there's something else out there. There are a lot of stories that we have. I don't know if you've heard Dave's story with the earring thing. Remember that one? No. Okay.
No.
Anyways, maybe I'll bring it up later. But it's like, there's these cases, they seem pretty evident that there's something else out there. To me, anyways. That's where the big debate is. It's like, well, this looks like there's something else there. But, it's like saying that there's no other cases out there, I think, would we all differ on that?
I would think that if, let's get down to brass tacks here. We're talking about the existence of a god or not. I think if there were any supernatural claim,
well,
that
I
would
would say
be...
it'd have to be God. It could just be lower level spirits. I'm open to either.
Spirit stuff.
Spirit stuff.
Sure, but, okay, all right, for the sake of the conversation, if we're talking about the existence of a god, and can this be examined using some sort of scientific inquiry, I mean, if there is, in fact, a god who is intervening with the world and is, in fact, communicating with people in some way, this would be something that would be easily demonstrable. If the Pope was really talking to the all-powerful master of the universe, we would be able to find this out. We would be able to distinguish the Pope from the head of the Mormon church. We would be able to distinguish these two people and say, clearly this person has some sort of divine knowledge that is lacking to other people.
Clearly? How? By what means?
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
How could we demonstrate the difference?
So, like, one example, I don't know, how would we demonstrate it? Okay, so if, say, there are things that we would expect to see in, say, books like the Bible, if it were truly inspired by a divine being. For example, the Bible is largely known, as you may have suggested earlier, and please correct me if I'm mischaracterizing you, but as a way to view the moral world that we live in a way to kind of understand right and wrong and these things. So if I were God, and I know a lot of Christians can get mad if you posit that idea, but if I were God and I were writing a book and I were trying to tell people how to be good in a world where they have to cooperate with each other and where they have to overcome problems, I would, one, include things like there are little germs everywhere that are going to be trying to kill you, so make sure to wash your hands. But I would also exclude things like thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. I would exclude the punishment for imaginary crimes. And most of all, I would exclude the passage in Exodus chapter 21, verses 20 to 23, about slavery, and specifically commanding that people can be enslaved and how much to enslave them and all these things. When I look at the Bible as an example, but this is analogous to many religious texts, I simply don't see anything that could not have been produced by somebody of the time, by a Bronze-aged person.
That's a legitimate argument. There's a lot to be said for that approach. I can think of a lot of different ways as well as that too. So maybe to back up in one way, and because there's a couple taking notes as we're talking here, and I'm thinking with regard to the Bible, if it's viewed as a historical scientific document, there's some history in it. There's some things that are demonstrate, I guess, let's say, that the purpose of the Bible, if I were to play God, then I would want to write stories that describe what your relationship with me as this superordinate being should consist of. As I look at the Bible, which is different in some ways than you look at it, I look at it as how you presented in your opening remark that you're one who would subscribe to a position, am I correct, that that God is created by man, as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, I believe man makes God in his own image, as opposed to the other way around.
That, I guess, in my viewing of the Bible, the entire Old Testament is nothing but a description of what happens when human beings try to make themselves God or try to create something that is, okay, you've got Noah and the flood, you've got the Exodus. Every time the story of the Jewish people, there's 6 basic incidents, and I can't name them all, but the entire Old Testament, as I see it, is a story of here is divine. You're acting in accord with your own being and the superordinate principle that is God, and you're the chosen people. And what do? You build a golden calf and you start to worship it. And what happens to you? You get wiped out. You're shown the promised land. What happens? We start creating other things in our own, and we don't need this God anymore. God smacks down again. And that's the story of the Bible, which I think is, if you'd want to take on that perspective, it's one way to look at it that kind of opened my eyes before. It's, yes, that's the whole point, that gods that are created by man, that's not the way it works. And I guess I'll pause there, but then add one more piece, and that's, yeah, I'm going along with my, I guess we're on a team now, I don't know.
Maybe an
that
enemy of my enemy sense.
There is, I was a little concerned when you said science tells us, and you got the who's that? Who's telling us? And it was like, I will go along with you on that part because I certainly see that there's a presupposed worldview that science presents that has colonized morals in some way. And as what I mean by that is, if you have two choices, the world, the universe consists of objects, Gatorade and microphones and human beings and flesh and blood and subatomic particles and so on, or does the universe consist of subjects and their experiences? Science and the scientific method in terms of analyzing, making predictions and looking for testable outcomes and having something falsifiable, yes, what we have to deal with is what seems obvious, that the world is made of objects. But that is a worldview that isn't the same as something that I could just as legitimately claim that I told you I exist, and I hope it was that you exist, but that the universe consists of subjects and their experiences.
Well, I think science, and it's kind of hard to discuss, science. Science isn't a monolith, obviously, it's made
Right.
up of
It's a
people
method.
just as, other groups are made up of people. But I think you don't have to take that presupposition of the world is only objects and there is no world of experience. And I'll give you an example. I think that the scientific experiment that shows that smoking is harmful, say, directly influences the world of your experience. And for somebody, maybe not a scientist acting as a scientist in such a way, but somebody who comes to this information that, okay, smoking is bad for your physical health, might be able to then say, okay, if you care about your physical health, then you shouldn't be able to smoke. You can make these value statements using science as kind of a partial foundation to this. And I don't think that you have to presuppose, the lack thereof of any kind of personal experience to say that science is incompatible with those things. I don't know if that's exactly what you were saying, but
Okay.
that's how I interpret it. And Jim, I saw you were preparing something, so or are you highlighting
We're only on
something?
question one, guys.
Yeah. No, one question down.
See, that was a good question.
I guess you're right.
And we didn't even come to the end of that question, but I just thought it was rather interesting in your statement, Will, that you don't believe that God created man in his own image, but man created God in his own image. And I think it's interesting because the Apostle Paul says pretty much exactly that is what happens. People come to that position when they reject God. They reject God, and then they put themselves up as God. And then the Apostle Paul says the result of that is that God, their foolish minds become darkened, and they no longer can understand. So I get that position, I do, and that position has been around for throughout history. People say, I don't want God. And then God says, okay, well, then you know what? You're not going to have
Well,
me.
and my position is that's the whole point of
Yeah.
the Bible.
Yeah,
That's
and-
not cherry picking out slavery and different errors and contradictions and things like that, as much as it's a story about your relationship with whatever you consider to be the top of the hierarchy of values, if you want to look at God as a definition that way.
See,
So-
I can you kind of go into that more? Because when somebody says to me, God is the creator of the universe, I get that. Or when somebody says that God is the, definer of what is moral,
Oh,
I get that. I don't necessarily understand exactly what you mean when you say God is the hierarchy of hierarchies.
Okay. My answer to that would be, I guess, when we were in the green room,
Yes.
and I started to throw out some things that I believe are true. The title of this group is Truth or Religious Nonsense, right? Is that very clever of you again, Kyle? That's,
Oh yeah, I'll take
that's
credit for that. That's totally my idea, not Jim's at all. No.
And so,
Actually, it wasn't even mine, it was Annie's.
I was expecting
okay.
a lot more atheists when I showed up to this group, by the way. I was kind of disappointed.
I was too, matter of fact.
Well, yeah, he was hoping for that. That's
I was
why the
hoping
name
for
was
that.
kind of geared
Oh,
to
gotcha.
make him in there, you know.
Didn't work.
so I guess in one way, it's a way I can cover my 4 questions real quickly and dispense with them by answering that. And I started to imagine, okay, what am I certain of? What do I think is true? That really, with all your questions that I saw, you can't kind of really talk me out of these. Like things that if I were to wake up and not believe it, it's like I can't
Sure.
imagine that. One is that I exist,
Right.
right? Covered that one, because I can doubt that I exist, but then who's doing the doubting?
Yeah, good question.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's one. I mentioned I'm convinced of the truth that I have been born into this world by no choice of my own, that I am suffering, have suffered, and will continue to suffer, that I have the capability, not unlike a god, I can blaspheme, just with the best of them, to tilt the world and make sacrifices and withhold my impulses and allow my children to fail and make mistakes and get hurt in such a way that I can try to tilt the world to being a better place, better for me, that's consistent with being better for my family and better for those around me in my community. I have what seems to be a divine ability, and I guess if I were to go so far as to say I believe we all have that divine ability.
What do you mean by
And-
divine exactly?
I don't know if you can imagine, well, I'll get to that.
Okay.
Here's how I'm going to get to it. Because when I don't, my conscience tortures me. When I tilt the world to be a little bit more cruel or malevolent or vindictive, or I take spite or I take revenge, it bothers me. And if it's something that I knew I could get away with, I do it and it still bothers me. And I don't know that source. Then every once in a while, at unpredictable times, happiness visits itself upon me. and I feel grateful. And that was another one of my questions, I guess, was when I experience such gratitude, it's not for my mom or my family or my kids or a rock or a plant or another human being. It's kind of this sense of thank you that I've been given or been blessed with what I have. And I don't know, and it's hard for me to calculate the direction to which that gratitude is directed. It kind of thank you, and I don't know where it's going, but it's going up and out.
Can I interject with a question? So, would you say that this feeling of gratitude, is that why you believe? Is that like, if that feeling of gratitude or that outward general direction of just this feeling, if that wasn't there, would that change like your position at all? Or
So I guess to answer that, I'd say this, I was trying to lay out what's sort of a cumulative amount of evidence
okay,
that I exist. I have the power to make the world a better place, and I definitely have the power to screw it up because I've done that. In fact, I don't want to say that's what I do most of the time, but I'm really good at it. And sometimes when I think so, anyway, that ability to take what's disorderly about myself and disorderly about my family and my community and create order out of it, suggests to me that I have as close to what I would describe as being made in the image of a God that I'm given that ability, but I know I fall short. All these things start to line up in a consistent way with the idea that I have a conscience that tortures me when I don't do it. And when I'm doing the right thing, it feels like I have one of those, I can't miss a shot in basketball. Like everything's going my way when I'm in line or I'm consistent with that sort of
You had me,
sense.
and I was looking. I was like, when are we going to disagree? Because you were saying a lot of things that I agree with you on, and I was just kind of wondering when the therefore God would kind of come in. And I guess I have to wonder what you mean by made in the image of God, because as far as I can tell, it doesn't even make sense to me. I know this is probably not going to be your position, but like physically, everyone, we look different. Identical twins excluded. So in any physical sense, I'm like, okay, that doesn't make a lot of sense with all of us here. But then you also have to come to the question, like, human beings are mammals. We're primates. We're a part of this bigger system that's here. I mean, if we're made in the image of some god, I don't see any particular reason why you could think that, because we're just one of many different kind of creature. In other words, what god are the other animals made out of? I don't.
And I think what you're wrestling with, if you're wrestling, I don't know if you are or not. If you look historically at the concept of the being created in the image of God as presented in both the Old and New Testament, although it's mostly in the Old Testament, what it really refers to, I believe, and I will preface this by saying a lot of theologians would disagree with me, and I'm not a theologian. But having looked at the texts and really thought them through, if you go back to the first time it's used in the book of Genesis, the phrase "created in the image of God," man shall not shed another man's blood because he's created in the image of God. And I believe that as well as there's other texts that lead into that being created in the image of God means that human being is different than everything else that was created by God. Everything else was created as material only. Human beings were created with spirit and material. They had the two dimensions, and so image of God meant they also bore an eternal spirit.
We've talked a little bit about this, and I just don't know what you mean when you say spirit. Like and I think this might be a good way to ask
I think
this
nobody
question.
knows exactly what spirit is.
Right. I mean, and that's kind of the problem with having these conversations is we have all these words that are slippery, to use terminology they used before. That it's kind of hard to pin down exactly what it is. So if say I had a friend who came onto our podcast here, and
We know you don't have friends.
yeah, we know. Pretend. Okay, this is a hypothetical. Okay, we can pretend. So I have a friend who does not have a soul, who is a human being, but lacks this eternal spirit that you're talking about. In what way is that person different from any of us?
They are different from any of us because they are more like a horse than they are a human. They die and they're done, whereas humans don't. And I understand that I think I understand where you're coming from, but I will also say this: if you look at the history of human beings, including up to this very day, the vast majority of human beings on this planet, I'm talking the vast majority, have believed that human beings have a non-material dimension. Okay, so your position on that is first of all very, very small compared to the number of human beings who have lived.
Mm-hmm.
They believe that that human beings continue to exist after their body is dead. So that's what the spirit is. It's that which they are when they don't have a body. Yeah, that'd be the simplest way to put it. And so there is an existence that doesn't include material. And we just, for lack of better, that's the word that's used there is spirit. The word is in the Hebrew. It's a word for wind. It's breath. It's something you can't see.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but people have believed in that, which is hence why there's been all the religions, because they want to do something about that fact that they operate on. I know you don't believe it as a fact, but they
Mm-hmm.
operate as if it's a fact that at the point of death, there's continued persistent existence. Now, I want to say one thing back to something you said really early when we first started, that it almost sounded like you were saying that religions make the mistake of talking about life after death and not talking about what's going on in this life. And I think the two of you, like humanism says that's one of their problems. They're not talking about here and now. And I would say that in fact, many of them have made that mistake, but a lot of them haven't made that mistake. They don't operate on talking mostly about the life after death benefits of their religion. They don't focus on that whatsoever. Here in the United States, the Judeo-Christian history that we have, there has been somewhat of a focus on that, primarily from Christianity, and even that, I believe, is somewhat misleading, and also maybe just because of some poor theology, but my understanding of the work of Jesus, as was foretold throughout the centuries before he was here, that his number one goal wasn't to get people into heaven, that his work of becoming human and living and teaching and dying and paying the penalty for sin and then rising again, was to make it so that human beings were inhabitable by God in this life, so that we could have God in us, so that we could have God manifest in us, which is what Jesus was telling people when he was around. You know, that's the kingdom of God is within you, he said. And so we can't have God in us because we are we do naughty things, as well as a lot of other things too that go along with that. But
we're full of stuff like Steve, is what you're saying.
That's a good one, Kyle.
we make mistakes, and we do naughty things, okay, that sort of thing. And so I believe that there certainly has been a legitimate claim against Christians who focus on just, gosh, I get to go to heaven now, and when that's not what it's all about. Because if you look closely at the teaching of Jesus, that what he wanted people to do as a result of their becoming in a relationship with him was to do what? Love other people. Oh, was to love other people.
I was going to say something, but I didn't want
Yeah.
to interrupt.
So that has nothing to do with going to heaven or any of that stuff. It had to do with transforming your life. And the number one reason for that, I believe, scripturally, is because that is the number one way to express who God is, by loving other people who are otherwise not lovable.
So kind of doubling back to kind of touch on your point, I will concede that most people throughout history, depending on who you ask, biologists will say that humans have been around for 100,000, 200,000 years, somewhere in that window. And for the majority of that time, I will concede that people believed that there was a secondary component. And it kind of makes sense, because when your friend dies and they're cold and they're not breathing, it seems that there's something fundamentally different about the stuff that's there. The material components seem to be there, but something is missing. I can see how you could come to that conclusion, that there is a ghost in the machine that makes it go, and that part has left. But with now our more modern understanding, I would say it makes it possible to leave that position now that we have more of an understanding of the material that we inhabit. And that kind of builds on to my question that I have for you, which is about the distinguishing of humans having this eternal spirit as opposed to animals. There's nothing I see that I can't see in an animal that I can see in ourselves as human beings. And I'll explain what I mean by that a little bit more. In the same way that when I see a human being dies and that essence has left them, the same thing is true for when your dog dies. When Spot is hit by the car, he's cold and he's no longer animated in that way. And I'm wondering how you could possibly... I can't see a world in which human beings have souls and animals do not have souls, because there seems to be no difference between human beings and the animal kingdom, I guess is
I'd say there's at least two, and that just came to my head as you were speaking, so
Sure.
I'm not saying it's limited to that, but at least two. The first one being the sense of conscience, as you were talking about. Even if you're doing something wrong and you feel like you've done something wrong, And you'd said when you were saying that, you don't know where that comes from. And actually, the Apostle Paul also said that we're all created with the things of the law written on our heart. Every human being has a conscience. We have a notion that there is a standard that is expected of us and that we fail. And when we fail, we violate our own conscience. And so that's where that comes from. And secondly, it's the desire almost across the board, and I think you could argue that it is across the board, the desire to worship something outside of us, the desire to connect with something outside of us. And I think that is totally human. It's not in the animal world.
And dogs can't feel like guilt inside.
No,
That's the exact example I was
Okay,
going to bring
no,
up.
dogs can feel like they've done something that is contrary to their owner's will, because I had a dog once that came home and I came home and she had chewed up some stuff she wasn't
Yeah.
chewing. She was hiding in the corner with the tail between
They
her
don't.
legs.
Yeah, they don't
But,
make eye
yeah,
contact.
Yeah,
and
sure.
they-
But that's a learned behavior that they know that they have done something wrong from in the sense of
I'm gonna
who's in charge.
I'm going to press you on this, because have you ever heard of Coco the Gorilla?
Sure.
Okay, so for the audience, Coco the Gorilla was a gorilla that was taught sign language, a special form of sign language called gorilla sign language. You can look into this. They had to do it differently because they don't have the same dexterity in their thumbs. And Coco learned, I think it was like 600 or 900 words, and could communicate at about the ability of a toddler. And there's a documentary you can see for free on YouTube about this gorilla and the scientists who examined her. One day, Coco Gorilla had a pet cat. And one day, Coco tears off this sink unit from the wall that in this place where they're studying the gorilla. And the scientist, the examiner, comes up to Coco and signs to her and says, hey, what happened to this? What happened to the sink? And Coco responds saying that her pet cat was the one that pulled the sink off the wall. And that just seems so human to me, the way that they can understand, I have done something that's wrong, and I want to shift the blame to somebody else, and that seems just so human to me.
I would agree.
I think that would fulfill any reasonable person's idea of what consciousness is.
I would suggest to you that giving an example like that, which also could be analyzed by saying that Coco had lived before that time in a scenario in which she learned that there was acceptable and non-acceptable behavior by her owners. Mm-hmm. And she had learned operant conditioning in doing that. And that operant conditioning includes, we learn to kind of pull back from things that we do that are negative. And
right,
so
but that's also like how toddlers learn morality. They learn it through that operant conditioning, just as the same that Coco
that would be a theory. Mine, Paul says otherwise.
There you go.
So,
Well, we could talk about research on child development and things like that. I wonder if it's just maybe a brief story about how humans experiment on rats. Maybe I'll leave you with this idea on that. So you're a psychologist, you're studying rat behavior. So you're going to put this rat at the beginning of a maze. You're going to put cheese up here at this part of at the end of this part of the maze. And the rat will just fumble around and make all sorts of mistakes, but eventually, after going through the maze all sorts of different ways, it'll find the cheese. You start the trial again, it finds it a little bit quicker, and every time it'll find it quicker and quicker and quicker. Mm-hmm. Then you, the evil experimenter, move the cheese over to another part of the maze. The rat will keep going back to that place. Where's my cheese? Where's my cheese? It's not there. It's not there. It's not there. Eventually, the rat will get tired, and eventually it'll start over the whole maze all over again, and it'll eventually go up and find a new pathway to the cheese. The difference between human beings and rats is that when we can't find our cheese, we tend to sit with a lawn chair out in front of the maze and wondering, where is that cheese? It was here before. It's got to come to me. That's a horrible story, and but I'm trying to think of a way to kind of, we have a different, we have a different sense that's qualitatively different, that's more than just looking like, what is it, dolphins and pigs can recognize, and gorillas, I think, can recognize themselves in a mirror. So you put a little like piece of white paint on Coco, and maybe Coco could, like, that's me in that mirror. Whereas you hold up a mirror to your dog or to your cat, they're not
Young enough
getting.
person.
So there's some species, so there's some evidence to suggest that it's the complexity and particularly language that makes it different, which is another, I guess, as I'm looping around to where I'm coming from, there's use a scientific term, a correlation, not a causation, that's going on with everything that I experience, that I described as my conscience, and that I exist, and that I have this ability to make the world a better place and to make it worse, and all that, seems to come back to a sense that, I don't know how to put it into words, that it lines up and is consistent and correlates with how I read the Bible and the story of Jesus, and in that way, it's a strong correlation. The experiences that I have and the way it's reflected in a way that I can understand, the Bible just
could you give me
matches
an
it
example
up.
to work with?
Well, as I think about, how about this? If you look at Jesus as the one, this is where we started in the green room again before. So
A lot of magic happened in that green room.
here's the story, that Jesus is blameless, sinless, is the way, so the story goes. Unjustly, unfairly accused. No, Pontius Pilate didn't want to murder him, but acquiesced to the Sanhedrin. I don't know. I'm looking to my friend. Phone a friend. And Pontius Pilate washes his hands of it, cries out, "Why have you forsaken me?" at some point, which is quite fascinating to me. Why did he do that? So as I think about that story, what greater story of heroism in our history can there be, that someone who was blameless took on punishment and agreed to sacrifice for a greater whole? That's what I feel like I'm doing when I'd sure like to tell that person off or flip them off on the, can I do this on the
No, you can't.
You're under
children in the
arrest.
room? I shouldn't have done that.
You and I.
I have a question to follow
go
up on
for
this. Well, I did have a question.
I'm trying to answer your question. I don't know if that's
Before you're talking about like this feeling that you got when you're like doing all these good things, that you get some kind of like good feeling, and you're talking about these stories and how they kind of correlate to your life and stuff like that. Where do we make the leap that it's divine, though, divinely inspired, as opposed to this is a story that somebody just wrote down and it just happens to correlate with you, or that your feelings that you're getting from this are just stuff in your chemicals in your brain that make you more beneficial to society?
It does wrap back around into the example that you proposed. I think it's the philosophical zombie that you were proposing, the idea that here's a human being who lacks a soul. How could you tell the difference? Because they could be programmed with operant conditioning to say all the right things and to use the right language. But let's say they lack a soul, or they lack the ability to experience qualia. Right.
In the Simpsons, I'll get back to
Okay.
it. Bart can't open the doors when Betty walks through to the Quickie Mart when he
Oh,
doesn't
'cause
have
he
a
doesn't
soul
have his
in
soul.
his
Right.
body. Sorry, continue.
So I
Can't
guess
qualia.
that's
so
it.
they're
So
blind,
they
deaf,
can't-
is that
No,
what you're saying?
they can't experience redness, what it's like to see the color red. To experience,
Well, I would
they
say-
can look like they're a mechanical instrument. How would you tell the difference? This is kind of the question.
There's an app on my phone called the Domino's Pizza app, and it has a feature on it where you can take a picture of something, and it will tell you if you took a picture of something that's pizza or something that's not pizza. And it has an AI that's able to recognize
interesting.
this is a pizza, this isn't a pizza, and you get points and you can win free pizzas and stuff. Today's podcast is sponsored by Donlan's. No.
It's certainly not that other place.
Certainly not that other
place.
That you don't work at.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I mean, you could build a computer that says that, you know, you give it a picture and it says this is red, this is not red. Would that qualify a computer to having like a soul in that sense?
There's, I guess, try to answer that. There's an interiority, exteriority question. If we want to look at like metaphysical, what would you need to get a universe going kinds of questions, everything that we know of has an inside and an outside. And we can measure your external self, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your respiration, galvanic skin response, how much perspiration you're having, and all the rest of it. That tells us nothing about whether you're about to wrap your hands around my throat or I can look at all sorts of visual cues and things like that. But there's it's not unlike the non-overlapping magisteria we talked before, that there's qualitatively something different that remains a mystery in cognitive neuroscience, that we don't know where this interiority comes from, the ability to experience. Where does a mechanical apparatus of cells and neurons and structures like that, where along the line does the ability to have a point of view and to be able to put it into words, where does that come about in animal species?
Right. I mean, I guess you could. Okay, I see where you're coming from, but by that same kind of line of reasoning, you know, Coco the gorilla has the ability to put things into language, and you know, we have computers that are able to take in information and process it and come to conclusions about what's read and what's not read. And analogously, our brains are made up of networks that, I am not a biologist or a computer scientist, so I if I'm wrong, someone will tell me, but it works in a way that's analogous to how the brain works. You know, we can look at structures in the mind that light up when we see something that's the color red, and we can see that as somebody who is identifying what red is, and if they don't have that, they can't be identifying what red is. Is this addressing what you're saying?
So I could steel man your position even more for you.
Okay.
If you want to know how it's not really the case that when you think you make a decision, you're making a decision. With fMRI studies, blood flow to different parts of the brain, cognitive neuroscientists have been able to demonstrate that it's about 5 to 9 seconds before you make the decision you're told you can do. You can either pick up the pen, I'll give you an example, pick up the pen or leave the pen there, or maybe hold it or drop it, whatever it might be. And totally up to you, totally your choice. That they're able to determine 5 to 9 seconds before you think you've made your decision what it is,
Yeah,
There you go,
what's
Carl.
going to
Free will.
happen.
No, I was looking at that study. I thought they debunked that later on. That was like a 2008 one, and then they later on said that they messed up when doing the studies or something like that.
I'm still going with,
Just
let's
throwing
say
that
it
out.
is a steel man position and it's true. Does that, we don't want to get into free will. That'll take us over
No,
into
no,
a
no.
whole other
Yeah,
direction.
and I
don't want to do that.
I don't think
Everyone's
that
wrong with that.
free will is a place that we really need
It's about
to go.
God, right?
I mean,
hold on.
I haven't really made up my mind about free will or not. I don't know, but I don't think it's quite necessary to the conversation that I think that we're having, which is, what is it about a soul that that makes humans have a soul and other things
Right.
don't?
And I'm going to turn it back over to Jim
Sure.
because I don't have a dog in that fight. I'm acting like I do have a dog in that fight with
We
my
don't
mouse and the
fight around
cheese
it,
story.
no.
But I can speak for myself. I can't speak for my daughter's fish as to whether it has an interiority and consents wetness or doesn't know what. I don't. there's no hill to die on for me on that one,
Well,
whether an animal has a
the
soul.
hill that I would die on in that is one of the things that Jesus said, and you can say he was wrong. You can say he was just an idiot, didn't know what he was talking about. But if you put any stock into the things that he said that have any truth value, he said, "Do not fear him that can kill your body." Don't fear somebody who can kill you.
I think you
Fear
should fear
him.
that person.
Fear him who is able to, after the body is dead, can kill your soul in hell. So
To me, what that sounds like is fear
was,
the clerics, in my opinion.
well,
It's,
yeah,
fear the people who are.
So he's making a big distinction. He's saying physical death isn't the thing we should be afraid of. It will happen, but we should fear that which can, after our physical body is dead, can then send us into eternal punishment. That's what he said we need to fear. And so if there were no such thing as any life after death, then Jesus would have been just dead wrong on that. And so, again, you don't have to believe anything about the inerrancy of the Bible or its historical record. But if Jesus said that, then he was saying something about eternal spirits. And he was saying something about the necessity of human beings to operate in our day-to-day lives in light of that eventuality. Because if there is someone who can do that, I need to sort of do business. I need to have some interaction with them. And if I don't, I'm pulling the wool over my eyes and just going to try and live my life in such a way that it satisfies me to my ends. So to me, it's like my friend Dustin answers sometimes. Says, what was the answer to that? Well, because Jesus. But in this case here, because Jesus believed that there was an eternal spirit. And in my book, if anyone knew about spirits and bodies, he did. Okay? So if he's wrong, I'm wrong. How about that?
All right. Well, kind of moving in the direction of an afterlife, I had an afterlife question on the pre-written questions that we had. So this is something that I think it will be interesting on both of you guys. I wonder if you have the same opinion. Are people in heaven able to empathize with people that are in hell? So my thought behind this is, and we've talked about this a little bit in other Torn discussions, so say I have a relative who is a Christian in whatever that means, and Christianity ends up being true, and there's a heaven and there's a hell, and my Christian relative certainly is going to heaven, and I, as a filthy apostate, am certainly going to hell. And I'm wondering, is that person who's in heaven really the same person? Like, say, if my close relative are they unable to feel bad for their relative who is in hell? Are they able to feel that pain? Or is heaven a place in which that pain simply doesn't exist? If it's the latter, I think heaven has fundamentally changed that person, and if it's the former, heaven isn't perfect. So I guess I'm wondering what your guys' opinions on, are people able to empathize with their fellow human being who is in hell if they are in heaven? Or maybe you have a different view on the afterlife altogether. I'm looking forward to hearing about that.
I can summarize mine really quickly,
Sure.
and that's I stay with, who was it that mentioned? I think it was you, Kyle. You want to talk about the here and now as opposed to the...
Yeah, focus on this
Master,
slide.
okay,
That's
fair
where
enough.
no,
We
I'm
gotta
just
figure
saying,
out the
that's-
slide before we look at the afterlife.
I have that approach to the concepts of heaven and hell. How they apply to me is that Kyle and I had a whole discussion. What would this heaven be like? And would it be video games and Doritos?
Yes.
Like all the time?
Yes.
I mean, if those are the things
got
that
it
you
in one.
love,
Yeah.
would be Minecraft, I don't know, or Fortnite, I don't know, what do you guys?
Yeah, you sit on the couch, play Fortnite nonstop, 24/7.
Oh.
Eventually you get
And
through
so
it.
there was part of what makes us human and allows me to experience and be visited upon with occasional pieces of happiness is the fact that I have found meaning in my life by doing productive work and by struggling. And so if heaven is defined as this place where I have no struggle and I've got no obligations, I'm kind of a meh on that heaven. I'm not saying the absence of pain, but the absence of productive work trying to, if the world is already perfect, it's like this thermal equilibrium. You can't tell hot from cold anymore. I can't tell the difference. What I know I have experienced of hell, however, is when I begin to not speak the truth and lie to myself, lie to people that I love or that I care about, or lie to a total stranger. And once I start doing that, I can then figure out another way to lie, to the point where Judge Judy could spot me a mile away. She's really good at telling who's a liar. And as you don't speak the truth and try to find your own way to basically have your way as opposed to being in accord with your being and your conscience, that's a steering away. That becomes hell, because the lies compound to the point where you're blameless. It's like an I'm okay and everything else is not okay. Therefore, anything that happens to me that's wrong, I begin to build resentment to that, which is a short path to cruelty, short path to malevolence, short path to that sounds like hell to me. That would be sort of my take on.
Hell was just more torture stuff, like burning and
I have
painful.
tended to have more of a self-inflicted view of it's a steering away from, as Jim said before, a steering away from the good, an intentional steering away from the good that leads, and why it's described as weeping and gnashing of teeth, because you end up getting serial killers, you end up getting mass shooters, and it's like Judge Judy, let me mention Dr. Phil real quick here too. So Dr. Phil had one of these, went and shot up innocent people, and he was asked, why did you kill in particular the innocent people, the ones who never had anything to do with you and didn't bully you or didn't bother you in any way? Because his answer is, that way people would really know how bad I feel. They would really understand that I feel so bad that I could do something to somebody who's completely blameless, and everybody would wonder what would be so horrible, so that people can begin to understand how I feel. There's an ultimate selfish, pure, I'm trying to think of evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's getting as
he's
close
looking
as possible
he's
to
looking
it.
for understanding, though. He's not just doing
Sure.
it randomly, right? So,
Right, there's still that.
and
element of
he's
it.
not having feelings. So when I think of hell, I think pain and suffering. Someplace you don't want to be. There's all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But then on the same thing as heaven, it's eventually people get used to that stuff. The people who get
Yeah.
tortured, they're like, well, electric, doesn't shock me anymore. It's like, people who go through CIA training and whatever, they get used to torture things so they can be. So to me, it has to be something else. And I know Jim has a different idea on both heaven and hell, how this works out. I'll shoot it over to you.
Okay.
If you want to go, you don't have to.
I have a few things. First off, in direct answer to your question,
Wow, I don't even remember what the question was.
Are people in heaven
They
able
feel
to
bad.
empathize with
Oh,
people in hell?
okay.
Feel bad for
in direct answer to your question, I tend not to make any claims about things that I don't have any direct or indirect knowledge of. Okay.
Man, why'd I invite you on here?
I know. So if in fact there was a text or there was something that was written down that said this is what hell is and heaven is like, that was from a source that I trusted, and I could say, okay, well, this source says it's like this. Okay. There is scant information in the Bible about what heaven is like. There's actually a little more about what hell is like. But as far as the subjective experiences of people in heaven, there really isn't much that's said. I know some people say, well, there's no sadness in heaven because there's no tears. It doesn't actually say there's no tears. It says that Jesus will wipe all their tears away. So maybe there's tears and they're just getting wiped away. And then there's more tears and they get more wiped away. I don't know. But that's been a pretty standard Christian theological position for a long time. But if I were to say something like, I don't know what it's like at the North Pole, and I asked you what's it like, and you said, I don't know, I've never been there.
On the camera, they got the pools because of global warming.
Yeah,
now, right?
that's right. But we could ask everybody here in the room, what's it like at the North Pole? I don't know, I've never been there. Okay. Well, if no one's been there, then what do we know? Now, there are some, again, going back to Jesus, you had mentioned earlier when he said, why hast thou forsaken me? Which I could spend a lot of time talking about why he said that, actually.
Well, I've got my own ideas.
Yeah,
I
I
probably
do too.
figured.
And yours might be right, mine's wrong. But not too long before he said that, he looked over to the thief next to him and he said, today you will be with me in paradise. And so his body was going to be in the grave, but he said, you're going to be with me. So your spirit's going to be with me in paradise. And so Jesus was in paradise for 3 days, and then he came back. So we have information from someone who was in heaven. And so we have someone who knows what it's like there, number one. Number two, we do have a scene in the book of Revelation where it shows Jesus there in heaven. And the scene where he is there in heaven, there's actually different ones, but the one that to me is the most spectacular is he's standing there in his white robe with a gold sash, and he has long white hair, which is automatically godly, except his is like wool. And
He's got to have the beard.
yeah, he's got a beard. And
That's funny.
it says his feet are like burnished gold, and his when he speaks, it's like the sound of many waters. And he's standing there up there in front of everybody, and everyone is just speechless because of his majesty. So heaven is, first of all, that. It's Jesus and the worshiping of him for what he did in putting up with all the nonsense down here and dying for people who didn't care about him. But the other thing is that it teaches that heaven isn't the final destination for those eternal souls anyway. The final destination is not heaven. The final destination is earth. People are going to come back down to earth. They're going to be on earth again, according to the New Testament. So, hanging around up there in some spiritual floaty bodies with nothing to do except play harps and stuff like that isn't the end game. The end game is to be back on an earth in which there is no sin. That no sin, I don't believe, doesn't mean that everything's going to be totally easy. And I don't want to go out and build my own log cabin and maybe cut my hand while I'm doing it, that sort of stuff. But it's not, I think, what you are envisioning based on what the text is saying. And secondly, and the last thing is that saying that hell is all the nasty stuff that I'm having here down here. That's why I'm calling that hell. To me, that's akin to saying something like, well, some guy goes out and murders a few people like they did, in the last couple of weeks. And they say, well, this person now, we're not going to execute him. We're going to put him in prison. Well, no, they already are in hell. They're in their own hell because their conscience is just killing them for what they've done. And so that's their hell. Well, okay, so we just let them go and they can be in their own hell. Well, that's their own hell, but there is also a system outside of that person's subjective experience that says, we're going to assign justice to you. And justice requires payment for sin. And so I don't care what your view of hell is, but God's the one who decides in the justice system what the punishment for sin is going to be, and not us. So we don't decide, well, God, I only did this many naughty things, so therefore you can only do this to me. You know, we don't do that any more than we do with a judge. When
One
you're
thing I would
before the
call you
court.
on is calling it a justice system, because in my mind, there is nothing further from my concept of what justice is than the outline that Christianity has on the afterlife. Because the core tenets of my understanding of what Christianity is that you throw your sins onto the sacrifice of Jesus, and despite the fact that you don't deserve it, you get to have a heavenly afterlife. And it's because what you deserve, as far as Christianity is concerned, is to go to hell, whatever that means. Personally, I think that the picture that they're trying to paint is torture forever. But the idea that you can throw yourself on this vicarious redemption, this scapegoat, I think is not at all what justice is. And if you have this God that's granting mercy to a select few and not to others who perhaps miss this revelation because they're born in halfway across the planet, like China, for like 1,000 years after Christianity has been around, or the Native Americans, or any number of groups that you can choose. If they're all going to hell and some other people are not, just because they have made some acknowledgement, to me, you can call it.
They don't even know, because like Native Americans, they didn't know anything about Jesus or the Bible or anything.
You can call it a religion, but I don't think you can call it justice, because if anything, you have a God who is punishing people who have no understanding of the variables that are at play. If you are somebody who, like what we were saying in one of these isolated groups, or you have the God who is and also, I should say, simultaneously, you have the God who is granting mercy. And you can't have a God that is all justice and all mercy, because mercy is the suspension of what justice is. Justice is you get what you deserve. Mercy is you don't get what you deserve. I'm going to spare you of that. So I'm going to call you on calling it.
You want to say
I know you're calling him on it, but you mind?
Sure. If anybody has any questions after this,
I was just about to say.
Yeah, we can take them here before we end up. So just be thinking about them. Go ahead and see.
So my daughter started 7th grade last year, so she's now in 8th grade. It's one of those schools where they supply middle school students, everybody gets an iPad. Everybody gets an iPad, and then they're all warned about all the dangers of social media, and yes, please don't do that stuff. It's not worth it. But there's also responsibility sheets that you have to fill out if you forget your iPad, and so don't forget your iPad. First week of school, she gets her iPad at home. Comes home. We're going to confirmation classes. I attend a Lutheran church. Now, to say that means I'm a Lutheran is the same way you might say people think you're a Catholic. But when we're talking and having Bible talk, having talk about God, and I ask her to tell me about that experience and why she would have, this is your chance to ask questions about God and Jesus and the Bible and the rest of it. And so she believes, she tells me that she's struggling because God made me forget my iPad. Honey, I don't believe in a God either that would do that would inflict pain on you for even a good reason, or not. So as I think about your approach to, I mean, we're agreed that we don't like gods that are created by men, right?
Yes.
We're kind of a thumbs down on that.
Pretty much, yeah.
I don't subscribe to the very same things for the very same reasons that it all sounds childish. That, hey, I can kind of, hide the ball when it comes to my sin, and I can, oh, yes, I accept Lord Jesus, and then all my sin's going to go away, and this kind of, or in the same way,
Well, I guess
you're
what I'm saying,
praying
even
evil
if you
upon
really
other
meant it,
people.
even if you meant it with every fiber of your being, that I accept Jesus and throw my sins onto you, the scapegoat. I think the act of saying take my responsibility away from me is immoral in itself. I mean, I kind of get what you're saying. The guy who's, kind of, half weighing it. I don't know how to rephrase that, but it's just kind of saying, oh yeah, Jesus, and then hoping to get into heaven. That's not really the point that I'm addressing. It's the idea that you can say, I can take away your responsibility. I can take away the feeling of regret and guilt. I can alleviate you of this and make it okay. In my mind, you could maybe serve somebody's prison sentence or pay a fine for them, but you can't tell them that what you did wasn't wrong, or that it's been redeemed because in this sort of.
I think I'm with you on that one.
Well, it may be because justice, and you have an idea of justice in your head. You have one. We all have ideas of justice. Everyone
Jim
does.
has a law degree.
And that doesn't make mine right. It doesn't. It doesn't make mine. But I will say this: the idea of justice in the New Testament is probably the best phrase that describes it. Is when it comes to Christians, is that he who knew no sin became sins for our sake, and we became the righteousness of God in him. So there wasn't just justice, there was transfer. There was transfer. So he didn't just say, I forgive you for what you did. It was paid for. There was penalty. There was penalty exacted for every single thing that every human being did. And so it's not just forgiven. Sorry. So that there is justice in that everything is paid for, but it's paid for by one person. And that's the difference there. So therefore there is justice there. Mercy comes in because there are some people who end up getting stuff they just simply don't deserve, and that's true of all of us. And to say for you to sit there and say, well, I don't think it's moral that someone would that I would want to give away my punishment because I did something naughty. My guess is that there will be a time when you and probably your children will do something like that, where you'll say, please don't punish me for what I did. You'll want mercy.
I don't think mercy is a bad thing. I do want to kind of make this point, and then we can let you finish up and go to audience questions. I'm not saying that mercy is a bad thing and that everyone should be punished for I think pardons are okay. I think people can be let off the hook sometimes. What I'm saying is the idea of taking away somebody's responsibility or guilt, or being able to say that somebody's sins are just to be, cast off with the scapegoat.
Yeah. Well, they weren't cast off, and which is exactly the reason why he said, in my mind, why have you forsaken me? Because he was at that very moment carrying on in his spirit the sins of every human being. So therefore, God turned his back from him, turned his face from him, turned his back to him. Because you are now sin. You are all sin to me. So that's why he turned his back to him.
Interesting.
So, okay, now,
Audience questions?
Interesting.
they don't have any.
What if they don't have any questions? That'd be really
Yeah, we got
awkward.
more we covered
Oh,
more.
Yeah, I
okay.
only covered like 3 or 4.
Did anybody send in questions on?
No.
No, that's fine.
Nobody's listening.
No questions?
I thought I saw a couple of excited faces when we mentioned
It's
audience.
excited to see somebody else ask a question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if not, we can go back to this. But I would really like to get the audience involved if possible.
Nothing?
I
gave you a warning. I gave you it was like 15 minutes ago.
That's because Will answered all their questions.
That's it. Yeah.
That's the reason
Yeah.
right there, okay? And there's nothing else that needs to be said.
All right. Well, we don't want dead air. So, what are some of these questions that we haven't tackled quite yet? Okay. So this is one for me.
I'm gonna go for it, yeah.
If we kind of touched maybe this was in the green room or at the very beginning, but if you woke up tomorrow and you no longer had this God belief, and essentially if you woke up an atheist tomorrow,
Yeah, that's a good one.
what would be the most different thing about your life? What would change about it?
I would have no purpose and I would have no hope. That's all.
So why do you have
I'd be
purpose and hope?
I'd be a useless.
And that's bad,
Well, let
right?
me
Yeah,
tell
that's
you
bad.
why you should all have
Yeah.
purpose and hope.
Is my purpose, that who I am, and what I'm looking forward to in the rest of this life and the next, is based on that. So if you took all that away, I'm like Coco the Gorilla, just hanging out here, just doing stuff, waiting to die.
I don't think Coco the Gorilla was waiting to die. She had a pet cat. No,
let's get Steve's answer.
Yeah, Steve, what's your answer?
Since I may have come on the waffling, weaselly, not non-committal when it comes to my sort of deism description, I act as if I do believe there is a God, is another way of maybe saying
Wow, it gets
that.
right on the fence. Let's let breathe might blow you over.
And so that's a good one too.
I like that one.
Yeah, is that so when you get up to, you're at you're in the big judge chambers and you say, well, I acted as if I believe.
My first thought was that's the best answer that I can think of. If I lacked the knowledge that anything that I do makes a difference, and I'm calling that atheism, I guess. Atheism insofar as that may follow from an atheist point of view, that there is no superordinate principle, there is no point, or if meaning is just something that we make up, or it's as weak as one of the secular humanist manifesto positions is this concept of we're getting better at getting better, right? That's secular. Human beings, we've come along, we've gotten better, and the whole point of we're getting better at getting better sounds like sort of a circular thing. What's getting better and who decides what's better, other than what's in the conscience on your own heart. It's almost the same as a theistic argument of I have this really clear vision of God, and the only way I could have such a vision is if God exists. Therefore, God exists. How is that for a little sleight of hand, right? There's a circular argument. If I ever heard one, it's sort of similar in that way.
I think
According to the text of the Bible, it said that Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived. Do you know that? Wisest man who ever lived. And
We've been going backwards ever since.
yes, we've been going downhill ever since.
take that.
And
Jesus.
Solomon said, essentially, if all this stuff doesn't exist, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. It's just all a game. Just have fun, have a good time, because in the end, that's all that matters.
Well, it was the point of Friedrich Nietzsche as
Yeah,
well.
sure.
He's the one who's often given the quote, God is dead. And usually it's quoted as, God is dead, Nietzsche. And then they say, Nietzsche is dead, God. But the other part of God is dead, the next sentence in that book is, and we have killed him. And so the idea is what happens when we do ignore every Old Testament lesson when we're trying to create ourselves in the image of God, and we don't need a superordinate principle or a divine reason for being here, and we don't have it.
I'm really trying to pin down exactly what you mean by these things, because when you say if I was an atheist, I wouldn't be able to be in this position of being able to make a difference, or knowing that I can make a difference, or to me that's just I'm having trouble even understanding what you mean by that.
Why?
Because just as a person myself who has just no concept of what this God thing is, I have no problem, understanding that people influence the world and can, shift things to be better and worse for people or whoever. I guess I don't see how those two things are tied together.
It does come back to, I think, where we began with, I guess, in some ways, my description of my conscience that tends to bother me. And that is, that is ought distinction and ethics involved that science can't touch, that seems to be, as Jim said, written or encoded in such a way, whether that's by a million years of evolution from the time we were lobsters or similar to a lobster. I don't know if you're similar to a lobster, but if there's an evolutionary point of view that we've been shaped in this way to have that ability to distinguish between good, which is a definition of God. God is the good. Okay, well, what does that mean? God
in
is
my
the
mind,
good.
That's the same thing as saying God is this microphone. I mean,
Really?
I see good in the world. I see it all the time, and I don't see God in that same way.
Okay.
And in a sense, I guess what I'm saying is I see the things that you're describing, but I don't see the God. I
How do
see.
you describe good if the microphone is good?
So we've had this conversation a couple of times at
Okay.
Torrent, so I'll try
Wrap
to
it up in
do
5 minutes.
the spiel.
We can
And
go a little
I
bit
mean,
longer.
you already mentioned the Secular Humanist Manifesto, and these secular humanism is a very good way to kind of sum up my position in general, and I'll run it past you again for the audience. The idea is that there are consequences to our actions. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about morality. There are things that we can do. There are a set of actions that we can take, and they all influence ourselves and people around us. This is what we're concerned with when we're talking about, what is right and wrong. And there are better and worse ways to achieve things to favor or disfavor the well-being of ourselves and others. I use the analogy of a chess game a lot. You can, if you know all the rules of chess, you can be given any configuration of the board, and there is a best move that you can make if your goal is to capture the opposing king, and there is a worst move that you can make when it comes to wanting to capture the opposing king. So if we're talking about what actions should we take and how they affect ourselves and the people around us, it's just a matter of fact that we can say that some actions that we take are better for the well-being of ourselves and others than other actions. Science can't tell me what I can value, but if I value Kyle's life, I can know that putting cyanide in his drink is a bad thing to do, as long as we come to that agreement that morality is about our actions and how they affect.
That's kind of excluding like the afterlife, though, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Sure, yeah. If
Well, if I lived like a good life,
the afterlife would
kill
definitely
me,
be
I'd go to
involved.
heaven. That'd be a good thing.
So if there is an afterlife, it would be within this kind of framework, because you can make that argument. So if let's say you have to accept Jesus into your heart or you go to hell, I'm not saying that's what your guys' position is, but let's say that's true. It would be within every Christian's moral interest, say, to convert people and to get them to make that prayer, because their well-being in the afterlife for an infinite amount of time is in jeopardy. And from that position, they could use that same humanism logic and say, I need to be going door to door and collecting souls. I think their understanding of reality is false, and I think that having understandings of realities that are just not true can come to those conclusions. If you think that smoking makes you skinnier and is good for your diet, everyone's going to be smoking, and we've seen this in real life. And we can definitely be wrong about things when it comes to morality. We definitely don't have everything figured out. But to say that there is no good or there is no evil without God, to me just doesn't make any sense. I see good and bad all the time. I don't see God.
Well, and I appreciate your position is one where you're not, so to speak, sitting back on a lawn chair, waiting for us to present the definitions of the God that will please you.
Sure.
You don't seem to have it's not an antagonistic, you really genuinely seem to be interested in understanding, is there a definition of God that is coherent to me, that I can wrap my head around, that I would go, well, yeah, I believe in that, if that's what you want to call God, but it had not better be watered down to the point where it doesn't match any sort of concept of God I might have had before. As
sure.
a supernatural author and creator of the universe, whose omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent.
And to me, the biggest problem in that is, I'll give you an illustration. When I was down in Lincoln philosophy department down there, I was having coffee with a fellow student, and we were talking about God and morality. The philosophers always talk about that stuff, you know. And she said that she read the Bible, mostly believed in it, but she wouldn't accept anything that the Bible said was right or wrong unless God gave a really good explanation for why it was right or wrong. Absent that explanation, she was not obligated to follow it. And I said, that's an interesting theory. I said, I would like to see it when you have a daughter, and your daughter's 5 years old, and your daughter, you'd say, don't do that, and your daughter says, Mom, you have to explain to me your reasoning, and I have to agree with your reasoning. If I don't agree with your reasoning, then you have no authority over me, unless I agree with your logic behind your command. I said, see, what you've done is you've set yourself up as the authority. You set yourself up as, I get to decide if this is reasonable or not. I get to decide if this is worthy or not of my life. And see, that to me is the heart and soul of everything we've set up to now, is that you're setting yourself up to be God. You're setting yourself up, or at least you're setting yourself, your intellect, your reasoning, your understanding, your morality, any of those things, you're setting yourself up as your standards are the correct ones, and there's none above mine that I have to answer to. That's really what it comes down to, and that's the heart of what you were talking about, the Old Testament. That's the whole story there.
I would respond to that saying, I am the first one to say, I can be wrong about things. Of course I can be wrong about things about the material world or what is moral, and I'm fully going to admit this. I don't hold myself in the position of thinking that these things are my gods. I have heard this before. People will say, well, science is your god, or your intellect is your god, or you know, your concepts of morality is your god. And I want to try to say this without coming off too rude, but it's not that I hold these things to be gods or godly in my mind. I do value them. I do value the project of science and the project of humanism. I do even more value them than your God. But I think it would be a mistake to say that I am venerating them in the same way that somebody might venerate their God.
Sure.
Okay.
We go along with that.
Yeah, I understand that.
Oh, look at that. We all agree. Have any more thoughts? Are you going to say something?
None that wouldn't take another 20 minutes, Kyle, so...
Yeah, we might as well start to wrap up here. It's 8:30, so I'm Kyle.
I'm William.
Steve?
And Jim.
And I want to thank our audience for being here. We didn't have any more questions, right? No? Okay. Yeah, well,
All right.
I want to make a shout out. Make sure every week we're doing Torn. We're going to be switching to Monday, I believe, right?
I thought it was Friday, but whatever.
Monday,
I don't remember
Here we
what we
go.
said. It was either Monday or Friday.
Okay, well,
yeah.
go on. We have our Facebook page. Go on
and-
the Facebook page.
yeah.
It'll be listed.
And the Torn website.
And the Torn website, and I'll also check out the Spooky Action at Distance. We have YouTube, Facebook. That's what this is streaming live on right now.
Now, to make sure that it was articulated, Spooky Action at a Distance, is that what
Yes.
it's called? Okay. Yeah,
Sorry,
so that kinda-
sometimes I ramble.
Yeah, and they're probably not aware of that, so make sure.
Yeah, it's a quote from Einstein.
Yeah.
Cool stuff. We talk about science, religion, philosophy. Steve's on there like 10 episodes.
Yeah, it's fun.
So, yeah, we talk for great times about different things. And if you want to be interested in this, come to a Torn meeting. If you're interested in paranormal or UFO topics, we have Saturday meetings here at the university as well, and everybody's invited to come to those. It's 10 to noon on Saturday. Just go to the Facebook page; it has all the details. Other than that, I think we're done here.
Oh, we have an audience question.
Yes.
Did anyone change their opinions?
Anyone change their
Oh.
opinions?
Oh, look at that.
That's the best question that could possibly be asked,
Yes.
right?
Well, I will tell you this, I think I'm the oldest person here, and I have been asked to debate many, many, many times in my life. And I have always said no until today. Well, not till today, but for today's. Because I believe them to be, for the most part, a waste of time. Because if they involve people who are just going to bellow about their beliefs and cut down the other person, then I'd rather go have pizza than do that. But I think, I mean, this here, I didn't even see this as a debate. This was just a moderated discussion. And so in answer to your question, in a moderated discussion, is the goal to have a change of beliefs, or is it the idea of just, I'm gonna use what some of the things they've said to kind of sink in here and rethink. I can say at this moment, I don't think I'm walking out of this room with different beliefs than I walked in, but I've heard a lot of good things, and I greatly appreciate having discussions with people who say things and believe things differently than I do. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I didn't have any changes in my personal view, but I'm glad that we did this, and it worked out extremely well. I found it to be fruitful, per se.
Very similar. My first thought was these kind of conversations can devolve into real, not to talk down to you, ask the most mature question and the best question that there is, but a childish sort of conversation where the theist says things that they can't support and just rely on the words of the Bible. And if that's not something that somebody else agrees with, then there's no point in that. Whereas I've seen debates where the other side is just, straw manning. Well, if you believe that the Bible didn't condone slavery and it could have turned out into something like that, that's what I kind of changed my mind about. Maybe this is something that human beings who can have a discussion about what I think would be the most important thing ever, other than aliens. I don't know. Aliens are pretty important. If we're not alone, that's a pretty big deal. But whether God exists and what we're supposed to be doing on this planet is the most important, I think, topic there is. And if we can have one like that, what I'm going to change from my point of view here, I think, is making certain that when I have this opportunity again, I'm able to describe a logically coherent assemblage of and better definitions of the God that I seem to act like I believe is is there. I think it requires me after this to, I obviously I don't hope I hope nobody thought I had this all figured out before I came here. But the openness and a genuine regard, William, that you have for, I'm just really trying to wrap my head. I see your superordinate principle and your hierarchy of values thing, and it's like, give me a God that I can kind of
Get my hands on.
Right, that I can feel better than just kind of my conscience. And I guess that would be my answer, that I need to ponder that quite a bit more before I would return to a discussion like this again.
It's a good question. Did any of you change your mind? And it's really important to think about that. And I personally like to think that my mind is never done changing. I try not to hold anything with such confidence that nothing could possibly change my mind. I think you get into dangerous territory when you think, I'm going to think this, and nothing about reality could ever change my mind, because that's when you sign on the dotted line saying that your belief has nothing to do with reality, and then you're in trouble. And to answer your question, I've changed my mind many times in the past, and my rule of thumb is that if the time to believe something is when it's been demonstrated. And to me, one of the reasons why I changed my mind from being a Christian to being an atheist was realizing that the demonstrations that I appealed to before were no longer holding as demonstrations that seemed reliable to me. So in this course of this conversation, no, I can't say that I've changed my mind too much. But I would never say that I would not change my mind in the future.
What about on the idea of reasonable discussions?
That gets to a very deep philosophical point. Is reason reasonable? And I would just have to say, if you want to say that reason is not reasonable, you have to assume reason and then find a contradiction. And until we get to that point, I think it's a good tool to use. It's the best we've got. It's like, who said it? Democracy is the worst system except for all the rest, or something along these lines. Yeah, that would be my answer.
Yeah, I like Jim's point that about the debate itself, which is like a moderated discussion. But I mean, I feel like this is how debate should go: is that we can all work together to come to a conclusion, and we don't really see that a lot. If you look at the political debates and stuff, if you look at religious debates, you look at scientific debates, Flat Earth Society, it's like people they're cemented and they don't leave themselves open to learn anything new. But I definitely learned some new stuff, so that I guess that changes my perspective. I think it was the Old Testament that you're talking about, Steve, with man creating God, and how that was kind of like the whole theme. Like, that's something I never put together.
Oh.
Any of those stories. So that definitely changed how I see that now, so I guess that's one.
Well, right, we're preoccupied. I'm glad. Hey, that makes sense, right? Because I hadn't thought about that before either.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't until about a year ago. Here I am, a 52-year-old man, and I hadn't thought about it from that point of view.
Any other
before.
audience questions?
Were you going to say something, Jim? You made a... Okay. I'll wrap it up. Again, shout out to all the groups. Torn on Facebook, the UNO UFO, or UNO MUFON, it's MUFON, study groups or society, it's also on Facebook, and the UNO Paranormal Society. We discuss all this stuff, all the time, and so I just love having actually people together and discuss it. And we'll have to have everybody back and discuss, paranormal spirits. We can discuss a lot of different things, like political theories. I bet we all differ on that too. But I want to continue doing this kind of stuff, and so that'll wrap it up for tonight. And I want to if this is showing on TV, if you're watching this on TV, it'll be probably in parts. So you have to come back every week. They'll be showing a different part of the debate. I'll probably try to label it so you know what part you're on. And if you want to watch it on YouTube, it should just be the whole thing.
If they've gotten this far, they've already seen the whole debate.
Well, it'll be showing 30-minute segments, so I'm gonna have to chop this up and put it, in different parts.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it may just be clips or whatever of us discussing things where I cut different things, but I haven't done it yet. We'll see how it goes. But it'll definitely be in parts. So if you want the full thing, go to Facebook, go to YouTube, all that kind of stuff. So anyways, that'll be the end of our show. We already gave our sign outs. So see you next week.
Okay.
Bye.